Welcome to part 10 of this series I'm in, How the Church Began, or How the Church Started, which is a part of a larger series I'm doing called History of the Church and Related Questions. Left off with sort of the development of the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire was basically multiple countries that sort of allied together underneath the Holy Roman Emperor and the Pope. And the Pope at this point becomes the most powerful guy in all of Europe, and this sort of happens for about but you see a lot of rapid new doctrines and rapid new structures of the church, or the Catholic Church. Once the Pope has all this power, he begins to institute all sorts of rules and regulations and structures to make sure that this structure stays in place and that he remains powerful. And so the selling of indulgences becomes incredibly popular. People begin to, there are lots of, and the regular person doesn't really know, because the average person at this time didn't know how to read or write, so they couldn't read or write their own Bible. They didn't have their own Bibles. The Bible had been translated into Latin back in 450 AD and in a few other languages, but it wasn't massively translated. They had Greek and Latin and a few other languages. But a lot of people didn't even read or write, couldn't read or write. They were very ignorant. And so the church would tell them, hey, this is what the truth, this is what God says. So a lot of people just believe it. You have massive ignorance, massive ignorance all across Europe, blind loyalty to the Pope, because they believed that God would send them to hell if they didn't follow. And so they would buy these indulgences and give all their money to the church, and this was a very, very corrupt system. And again, you still have the strength of all these little mini monks and monasteries, sort of, that didn't have political power. They were priests, but didn't have political power. And they were the true devout followers of Christ, and these guys would pray and fast, and occasionally you have some of the priests with political power that would come and listen to the monks and would institute some good aspects of Christianity in these areas. But as soon as that priest would die, the next guy would come in, might be corrupt or evil and would just be selfish and looks for political power. So a lot of those little mini revivals, little mini rebellions or reformations would sort of die off. This is the case all the way up until about 1300. And so you have about a 400-year period where this is the case, where the Holy Roman Empire, run by the Pope, is the top dog. Eventually, the alliance between these countries begins to weaken right around 1200 AD. And it's not nearly as strong. And in theory, it was officially in existence all the way up to like the 1800s. But really, when it was its strongest was like 900 AD to about 1200 AD or so, and a lot of its power crumbles as these individual countries were very stable at this point. And really, the individual countries then, so you no longer they eventually did away with the idea of a Holy Roman Emperor over all the countries, where it just became the individual leaders, governors, or emperors of each individual country, directly accountable to the Pope, directly listening to the Pope. And so the countries weren't nearly as friendly, or weren't nearly as amicable to another, and as each individual country became stable, they didn't need the other ones. So they sort of became their own sovereign nations, and you see less and less of an alliance under this, but up until about 1200. But this is sort of what happens. And then right around 1250 AD is the beginning of what is called the Inquisition, where you see all these, where the central power begins to weaken a little bit, and you have all these little mini revolutions, little mini revivals and mini reformations, where people are trying to break away from the Catholic Church. And so the Inquisition, where the Catholic leadership basically set out and said no. And it started in France and other European countries, where it became illegal to teach anything other than Catholic doctrine. If you begin to teach, so some of these guys would begin to learn to read and write, and would read the Bible and say, wait a minute, the Bible doesn't say what the Catholic Church is saying, would speak out, and they would execute them, or they would burn them at the stake. Or they began to say that these guys were witches, and they had supernatural powers, and and this is the early stages of witch hunts, which really didn't take place until the United States in the 16 and 1700s. But you begin to have some of these semblances take place. But at this point, you have English becomes a major language. At this point, the Crusades have been going on. In the year 1000, Pope Urban is the guy who gives this incredible. So you can Google Pope Urban's call for the First Crusade, where all these Muslims had taken over the eastern portion of what used to be the Roman Empire and the Holy Land, And the goal was for the Roman Empire. Pope Urban said, this is, remember, from this is about 100 years after the Pope has gained all this new power, and they're trying to institute it and keep it that way. And now they want to expand the power to the rest of the world. We want to bring back the glory of Constantine and take back over take over the Ottoman Empire and take over the Muslim world. And you see these massive wars being fought. All these Europeans going to the Holy Land in the Crusades to fight wars against the Muslims to try to take back the Holy Land. And the Crusades are wars that happen between European, what is now being known as Europe, and European Christians or Catholics versus the Muslims of the Arab world. And this massive infighting takes place for several hundred years. And so this is this is what happened. So 1300, the individual countries begin to rise up, but all these little mini reformations, these little mini revolutions, mini revivals are popping up all over Europe. And the goal had always been to sort of revitalize the Catholic Church and bring it back to its true, faith in Christ, and being a religion, a faith where they loved people and they were about serving people, not about oppression. And you begin to see, as these countries stabilize, you see a massive rediscovery of technology, of knowledge. Lots of people begin to learn to read and write again. There's discoveries of medical technology that had been developed 1,000 years ago. 12 and 1300 AD, people begin to discover in these old libraries these writings from ancient Rome and ancient Greece, 2,000 years earlier, 1,500 years earlier, from ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia. And they begin to find some of these things. And a lot of the Europeans still did a lot of trading and interaction with the African countries and with some of the eastern portions, some of the portions of Eastern Europe. Some of those Muslim nations weren't as fierce as the ones that were in the Holy Land. So there was still some commingling, and you see this massive rediscovery of technology and a stabilization of societies and a stabilization of roads beginning to develop. People began to travel and trade again in a way they hadn't done in hundreds of years. And so this sort of gives way. This is sort of how the world is rapidly evolving and changing between 1250 AD and about 1350 AD, that 100-year time period. So you have, in that time period, you have the weakening of the Holy Roman Empire, where the Pope had direct oversight over individual emperors. You have the rise of the Inquisition, where the Catholic Church is executing and persecuting people who rise against them in a very, very fierce way. And you have a rediscovery of technology and innovation and knowledge, which is going to give way to the time period which is known as the Renaissance. It's amazing, in world history at this point, in all the videos we've basically covered from the year 8 BC, the birth of Christ, or 4 BC, the birth of Christ, up till about 1300 AD. And at 1300 AD, 1,000 years earlier, is when Constantine had legalized Christianity. And you think about where the Christians had come from in this time period. 1,000 years. When you think about 1,000 years, and we're currently in the year 2010. 1,000 years ago was the year 1010. I mean, the world is so different now than when it was back then. The same happened from 1300 AD till about 300 AD. I mean, you have 1,000 years of rapid cultural changes and massive things have changed, and you see the Renaissance begins to be the era where people begin to rediscover, they begin to appreciate music and culture the way that they did back in ancient Greece and ancient Rome. They begin to rediscover different systems of politics other than just an emperor who tells everyone what to do with ultimate power, other than a monarchy, where you begin to see the rise with the thing called the signing of the Magna Carta. And you see the rise of, with these little Christian reformations, little mini Christian revivals, you see the rise of education and freedom, and you see the Catholic Church trying to keep them down as much as possible. And then eventually people stop, they give up on trying to reform the Catholic Church and begin to break away altogether. This gives way to the next series of videos, the Reformation.